They thought life at the wooden cabin on the forest's edge would stay quiet forever. Just Ethan, a battle-scarred veteran, and Rock, the loyal shepherd who never left his side. But on a frozen winter night, as snow buried the world in silence, Rock dragged Ethan into the darkness, toward a crime no one was meant to witness. A young police officer was hanging upside down from a tree, barely alive, the kind of sight that ripped open memories Ethan had spent years trying to bury. The faces of fallen comrades, the ones who never came home, flashed before him. And in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. The peace of this forest was over. A storm of danger, betrayal, and hidden cruelty was about to rise, and Ethan would have no choice but to face it. If you want more gripping stories about veterans, loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their animals, make sure to subscribe to the channel for the next chapter. Winter pressed its weight upon the forest edge, a cold so absolute it seemed carved from ancient stone. Snow coated the world in a pale hush, muting every sound except the groan of wind slipping between the pines. Ethan Ward moved through that silence as though he had become part of it. At 48, he carried the weathered toughness of a man shaped by wars he no longer spoke of. Broad-shouldered, streaks of gray threading through his dark hair, a beard grown uneven from days without care, and eyes carved in the stern blue of men who have seen too much. His face held angles sharpened by hardship, a nose slightly bent from an old break, and cheekbones that seemed sculpted rather than grown. His left hand sometimes twitched when memories ambushed him, a reminder of a night in Afghanistan when shrapnel kissed bone and left him with both a scar and a silence inside. He lived now in a lonely wooden cabin at the forest's edge, far from the noise of towns, the buzz of screens, and the crowded expectations of people who thought healing could be rushed. The cabin was small, hunched beneath leaning pines, its roof heavy with snow. Inside, heaters hummed like distant heartbeats, and the faint smell of wood smoke tangled with the scent of wet fur belonging to Rock. Rock was a 5-year-old German shepherd, large even for his breed, with a dark saddle marking across his back, amber eyes alive with intelligence and a regal posture that hinted at bloodlines built for courage. His ears stood tall, always listening, always judging the world in ways Ethan wished he still could. Rock had a calm temperament, loyal, steady, protective, but winter nights tended to stir something primal in him. Ethan had learned to trust these instincts more than his own. That night, as wind battered the windows and snow tapped like icy fingertips against the walls, Rock suddenly stood rigid, ears pricked, body tense as a drawn bow. He released a low growl, the kind that rumbled from deep in the chest. Ethan paused mid-step, feeling that old pulse of alertness rise, the soldier in him never fully dead. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, but Rock had already turned toward the door. When Ethan opened it, the cold slapped him full in the face. The wind carried with it a strange fluttering sound, thin and irregular, almost like a muffled cry being dragged between trees. Rock lunged ahead, paws sinking into knee-deep snow, moving with a certainty that made Ethan's breath tighten. Ethan followed, boots crunching, each step stirring old instincts. His mind circled memories he preferred buried, shouts echoing down broken alleys, men left bleeding in dust, the weight of command he could never give back. But tonight the forest reclaimed his senses, forcing him to focus on the present. The trees grew denser as Rock cut deeper into the woods. Moonlight fractured through branches, turning the snow into shards of silver. Ethan felt the tension coil in his muscles, a quiet readiness he hadn't worn since leaving the military. His breath crystallized in front of him, rising like smoke from a tired fire. Then Rock stopped so abruptly that Ethan nearly stumbled into him. The shepherd's tail stiffened, nose raised, body trembling with an alert sharp enough to slice through the cold. Ethan squinted through the trees. At first he saw nothing, only shadows tossing like restless ghosts. Then the shape emerged. A human form hung upside down from a thick limb, bound tightly at wrists and ankles, swaying slightly with the wind's slow, cruel rhythm. A young woman, no older than 30, her hair dark and stiff with frost, her uniform jacket twisted around her body. Her skin had turned a bluish white, lips cracked, eyes half-lidded in a frozen daze. A police badge glinted faintly near her collar. Ethan's heartbeat slammed against his ribs. Something primal, protective, furious, ignited in his chest. The soldier awakened. He rushed forward, brushing snow off her face. She was breathing, but barely, each inhale shallow like a dying ember. He muttered to himself, to her, to the cold, "You're not dying out here." With gloved hands numbing fast, Ethan found the knot binding her ankles. The rope was rough, stiff with frost, but he worked through the pain until it loosened. The woman fell, and Ethan caught her with a grunt, lowering her gently to the snowy ground. Rock circled them, releasing soft whines, his breath fogging the air like smoke. Ethan lifted the woman, surprisingly light as if winter had already begun claiming parts of her, and held her close to share what warmth he had. "Hang on," he murmured as he began the long trek back. "We're getting you out." Snow swallowed their footprints behind them as the wind tightened its grip on the forest. The night had planned to take her. Ethan would not allow it. The cabin groaned softly as wind pushed against its timbered walls, the storm outside still gnawing at the edges of the forest. Inside, Ethan Ward moved with the deliberate steadiness of a man who had carried too many fragile things through too many violent nights. He laid the young woman onto the narrow cot near the stove, adjusting the blankets with a clumsy gentleness that surprised even him. Rock paced beside them, his thick winter coat shedding flakes of snow, amber eyes flicking constantly between Ethan and the stranger as if measuring every shift in her breath. The warmth began to seep into her skin, returning a faint flush of life to cheeks that moments before had been blue and stiff with winter's claim. Her eyelids fluttered, lashes trembling like snow-swept pine needles, and finally she dragged in a ragged breath. Ethan leaned closer, noting the details now that survival was no longer seconds away. She was younger than he first guessed, maybe 30, maybe less, with a narrow jaw and a determined mouth even in exhaustion. Her hair was dark brown, tangled with ice, and her lips cracked from cold. When her eyes opened, they revealed a hazel sharper than broken glass yet clouded with pain. She tried to sit up immediately, instinct before reason, but the motion sent her collapsing back with a soft gasp. Ethan placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Easy. You're safe here for now." His voice had that gravelly timbre war had gifted him, steady, controlled, but carved with old fractures. She blinked, focusing on him for the first time. "You found me." "Hanging." "My dog did," Ethan corrected, glancing at Rock, who now sat like a silent sentinel. "He doesn't usually drag me out in the middle of a blizzard unless something's wrong." The woman turned her gaze to Rock, and despite her condition, her features softened. "Smart dog." "Too smart," Ethan muttered, though affection threaded quietly through his tone. "What's your name?" She swallowed, struggling against the dryness in her throat. "Officer Mara Lewis, Wildlife Crimes Division." Ethan felt the familiar tug of dread beneath his ribs. Names always made things more real. He fetched a tin cup, filling it with warm water. Mara drank shakily, each swallow drawing color back into her face. When she finally exhaled, her breath steadied, but her hands still trembled as though the memory of the rope clung to her nerves. Ethan waited. People who survived ambushes needed time before words could crawl out of them. Mara, however, forced hers through the pain. "I was closing in on a trafficking ring. They've been pulling rare species out of the national park, snow bears, lynx, white wolves, you name it, anything they can sell to collectors." Ethan frowned deeply. He had spent years in this forest, learning its seasons, its wounds. The idea of someone carving life out of it for profit pressed against something raw inside him. Mara continued, voice gaining, edge despite exhaustion. I wasn't alone. I had support from someone who knows these woods better than most. She paused, jaw clenching as if bracing herself. A ranger, Derek Hart. Ethan didn't know the name, but his body reacted before his mind did, shoulders tightening, breath sinking heavier into his chest. Mara went on. Tall, lean, about 40, sharp face, blonde hair cut tight, the type who smiles like he's already won and talks like nothing touches him. There was bitterness there, old and fresh all at once. He said he'd help me track them. He knew their roots, their habits. I trusted him. Ethan absorbed each detail with the rigid stillness of a man listening to footsteps in a dark hallway. He knew the type. Men who wore authority like armor. Men who didn't flinch because they'd rehearsed the betrayal long before committing it. He had fought beside some. He had buried more. Mara's breathing hitched. He led me off the main trail. Said he spotted smoke from a camp. Next thing I knew, someone struck me from behind. When I woke up, she swallowed, voice sharpening with shame and fury. I was hanging there, like prey. Rock growled softly, picking up the tension rolling off her words. Ethan's jaw tightened. He felt the cold inside him settle into something hard and bitter. He had known betrayal, known its smell, its taste, the way it reshaped the world overnight. Derek Hart, whoever he was, had reawakened memories Ethan had spent years burying beneath wood smoke, isolation, and silence. Mara studied Ethan's expression, reading the grim understanding etched there. "You've seen it too," she said quietly. "The kind of person who pretends to stand beside you until he decides you're more valuable broken." Ethan didn't answer at first. His gaze drifted to the window where snow pressed against the glass like white fire. He felt the old ache rising, the ambush that had taken his unit, the friend who turned shield into weapon, the endless nights after. "Yeah," he said finally, voice low. "I've seen it." Mara winced as she shifted, pain rippling through her limbs. Ethan steadied her without asking. She met his eyes, resolve returning piece by piece. "I can't let him get away with this. Derek knows the forest, the roots, the buyers. If he isn't stopped, more animals will disappear. And more people." Ethan felt an old duty stir inside him, not commanded, not ordered, but born from the part of him that refused to watch innocent things die. He exhaled slowly. "Then we'll deal with him." Rock barked once, sharp and decisive as if sealing the pact between them. Outside, the storm clawed at the trees, unaware that within the small cabin, a new hunt had already begun. Dawn pushed weakly through the storm's remnants, pale light spilling across the cabin yard like a thin bandage stretched over a wound. The trees still bowed under winter's weight, their branches trembling with frost, and the cold carried that sharp metallic taste that always reminded Ethan Ward of mornings before a mission. Rock stood at the doorway, his thick coat bristling and breath rising in slow white clouds. His nose twitched, catching something Ethan couldn't yet see, and the dog released a low, urgent whine. Ethan tightened the strap of his winter jacket. Mara Lewis, still stiff but determined, zipped her torn uniform coat, her movements marked with soreness but not hesitation. Her face looked different now, less fragile than the night before, sharpened with purpose. That bruised resolve suited her. It made the hazel in her eyes burn with a fire that refused to die. "He's got something," Ethan muttered as Rock bounded toward the tree line. Mara followed close behind, her boots punching into deep snow, though every few steps she winced from the lingering ache in her ribs. She pushed through it, jaw tight. She wasn't the kind who let pain slow her. The forest welcomed them with a hush broken only by Rock's paws slicing through snow. Ethan's mind settled into the old rhythm of tracking, silent observation, controlled breathing, senses tuned to patterns most people never noticed. Rock's nose swept the ground before he abruptly stopped at a patch of disturbed snow. Mara crouched, brushing aside the powder. "Here," she murmured. A spent rifle casing. Half buried, edges still sharp. Snow had partially filled the imprint beside it, but not enough to obscure the shape of a boot mark. Someone had tried to wipe it away with a hasty sweep of a sleeve or foot. Ethan scanned the trees, the air sharpening around him. "They covered this in a rush," he said. "Not well." Rock pulled ahead again, weaving through the pines. Ethan and Mara followed until he led them to a deeper scar in the snow, a trail of something heavy being dragged. Mara traced it with her glove. "Cage tracks," she said. "The metal scrapes leave that U-shaped groove." Rock nudged at something half-frozen nearby. Ethan plucked it from the ice, a glove, dark green with the embroidered insignia of the Park Service. A ranger's glove. Mara's breath steamed as she stared at it. "Derek," she whispered, anger twisting her voice into something brittle. "He's sloppy when he thinks no one's watching." Ethan felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the one betrayal always summoned. "He's moving animals," he said. "Recently." They continued deeper into the forest, Rock guiding them with the relentlessness of a creature born for the hunt. Time blurred into the crunch of snow under boots, the sting of cold air, the steady rise of tension. Eventually the trees thinned, revealing a narrow gorge with walls of jagged stone jutting, like broken teeth from the earth. Mara halted, eyes narrowing. "This is where he said he spotted smoke, the night he turned on me." Ethan scanned the canyon floor. There, half hidden beneath a drift of snow, was a collapsed tarp stiffened with frost. Rock sprinted forward, barking sharply. When Ethan and Mara reached him, they saw the truth. A makeshift camp, hurriedly abandoned. Fire pit stones blackened by recent use. Empty metal cans stacked carelessly. A roll of coarse rope matching the kind used to hang Mara. But what froze both of them wasn't the camp. It was the line of cages tucked beneath a rock overhang. The cages were crude, welded from mismatched steel bars, and their hinges were iced over. Inside them, life stirred weakly. A lynx blinked slowly, its tufted ears drooping. A white wolf curled into itself, ribs stark beneath its fur. And in the center cage, covered partially by a frost-heavy tarp, were two snow bear cubs, pale fur matted, noses raw from the cold, their breaths thin as smoke. Mara stepped closer, eyes wide with something between awe and heartbreak. "I've been tracking these cubs for months," she whispered. "They were separated from their mother near the northern ridge. Poachers must have seized them soon after." Ethan felt a heat rise inside him, sharp against the winter air. "They won't survive long like this," he said. Rock whimpered softly, lowering his head near the cages. Mara pressed her hand against the bars, fury tightening her features. "Derek knows every patrol gap, every blind spot. He's been feeding these traffickers information and using his badge to move shipments unnoticed." She looked up, meeting Ethan's gaze with fierce clarity. "They'll transport them tonight. Small animals are easier to move under darkness, and storms make good cover." Ethan nodded slowly. His mind was already calculating paths, escape routes, timing. Old instincts flexing like muscles waking from sleep. "If they're planning to cross the border tonight," he said, "we've only got a few hours, and they won't leave these tracks behind unless they're circling back soon." Mara closed the cage gently, though her hands trembled with restrained rage. "We can't wait for backup. Derek will cover their trail before morning." Ethan glanced toward the ridge. The sky had begun darkening again, storm clouds gathering in bruised shades of purple and gray. Rock stood poised, watching the wind as if waiting for Ethan's decision. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Then we act now," he said. Snow swirled around them, the world tightening into a single, urgent truth. If they didn't move fast, those cages would be empty by nightfall. Night descended with a violence that felt almost sentient, a living storm swallowing the gorge and turning every shape into a blur of white teeth. Snow slashed sideways, carried by winds that howled like wounded spirits scraping their claws across the stone walls. Ethan Ward stood at the mouth of the makeshift camp, breath forming thick clouds. His body tightened into that old battlefield readiness he thought he had buried with his past. Rock paced at his side, fur whipped by the storm, ears pinned forward, every muscle alert. Behind them, Mara Lewis crouched beside the cages, working with numbed fingers to free the lynx and the white wolf, her face drawn but fiercely focused. The snow bear cubs whimpered under their tarp, small chests rising and falling in rapid, frightened breaths. Ethan was checking the magazine of a rusty rifle left behind by the poachers when Rock's growl deepened into a warning rumble. Mara froze mid-motion. Ethan turned toward the ridge. Shadows emerged, bodies cutting through the storm like phantoms. At least 6 men, bundled in heavy winter gear, goggles reflecting fleeting flashes of moonlight, and leading them was Derek Hart. He appeared almost serene against the blizzard, a tall man in his early 40s with a lean, hard build that made him look carved from winter itself. His blond hair was cropped close beneath a ranger's cap, his jaw sharp as an axe edge, and his expression maddeningly calm. In the storm's dim light, his pale eyes gleamed with the cold certainty of a man who believed consequences were things that happened to other people. "Evening, Ward," Derek called, voice disturbingly conversational despite the wind. "Looks like you found my little operation." Ethan stepped slightly forward, planting himself between Derek and Mara. "You left tracks," he said. "Sloppy for someone who knows these woods." Derek smirked, a thin curl of contempt. "Sloppy or deliberate? Men like you are predictable. You can't ignore a cry for help, even if it's a trap." Mara rose behind Ethan, fire in her eyes. Derek flicked a look at her, his tone amused. "Officer Lewis, I truly thought you'd freeze to death. Pity." The storm intensified around them, but the cold inside Ethan was sharper. He lifted the rifle, bracing it. "You're done, Derek." Derek gave a small signal, 2 fingers slicing the air. His men sprang into action. Chaos erupted like thunder. Ethan moved with instincts born of survival, taking cover behind an outcrop, firing a warning shot to force Derek's men to scatter. Snow exploded where bullets struck, sending white bursts into the air. Mara darted back to the cages, yanking open latches with fierce, frantic speed. The lynx shot out first, disappearing into the swirling dark. The white wolf lingered, lips peeling back in a snarl, then bounded into the storm. Rock's roar joined the storm as he lunged at a man circling behind Mara. His massive body collided with the attacker, knocking him down. The poacher screamed, dropping his knife as Rock clamped onto his coat sleeve, dragging him across the snow. Ethan ducked as another shot passed near his ear, then charged through the storm, crashing into the shooter and slamming him down with a shoulder strike. Pain radiated through Ethan's ribs, but he kept fighting, old training guiding every movement with brutal efficiency. Mara finished the cages, then grabbed a fallen baton from the snow. She struck another attacker who barreled toward her, the crack of impact swallowed by the wind's roar. Derek watched for a moment, his calm mask slipping into irritation. "Enough," he muttered and advanced toward Ethan. Ethan turned just in time as Derek swung a metal rod toward his head. Ethan blocked with his forearm, pain jolting up his arm. Snow battered their faces, but nothing moved them apart. "You think this forest owes you justice?" Derek snarled, shoving against Ethan with surprising strength. "Out here, only the ones who adapt survive." Ethan gritted his teeth. "You'd know. Parasites adapt to anything." Derek's eyes flashed with rage. He lunged again, this time catching Ethan's jaw with a glancing blow. Ethan stumbled back but regained footing, tackling Derek into the snow. They rolled, fists slamming into ribs, jaw, stomach, pain merging with the storm's fury. Derek managed to grab Ethan's collar, dragging him close. "You're old, Ward. Broken. You should have stayed in your little cabin." Ethan saw, in that moment, every betrayal he had survived, every friend lost, every mission that left him scarred. and he saw Mara behind them, battered and breathless, still fighting because Ethan had chosen to intervene. Rage steadied him. Purpose fueled him. Ethan twisted, using Derek's momentum against him, flipping him onto his back. Derek tried to rise, but Ethan pinned him down, knee pressing into his arm until the ranger's wrist buckled. Snow gathered in Derek's hair, on the edges of his coat, turning him into a dark shape swallowed by the blizzard. Ethan ripped the handcuffs from Derek's belt, the same cuffs used to bind Mara. Derek thrashed violently. "You think this ends with me?" he hissed. Ethan snapped the cuffs over Derek's wrists, slamming them tight. "It ends tonight." As Derek lay bound, the last of his men collapsed under Mara's strikes, or Rock's furious lunges. Silence crept back into the gorge, broken only by the storm's brewing howl and the frightened sounds of the snow bear cubs. Mara limped toward Ethan, breath shaking. "The others are down," she said. Ethan rose slowly, muscles burning. He looked down at Derek, finally still, finally powerless. The storm raged on, but inside the gorge the fight was over. They had won before the night could claim anything else. Morning arrived gently, as though the storm of the previous night had exhausted the sky itself. The blizzard's rage softened into a calm, gray dawn, and thin rays of sunlight stretched over the forest like hesitant fingers testing the world's temperature. Snow lay heavy on the pines, but the air no longer bit, just breathed cool and clean. Ethan Ward stepped outside his cabin with the slow stiffness of a man whose muscles carried the memory of combat. The bruises across his ribs throbbed with every breath, but he welcomed the ache. It meant he was alive, and more importantly, that others were too. Rock padded beside him, the big shepherd moving with a proud heaviness after the long night. A scratch ran along his flank, but it had already begun to scab. His amber eyes were alert yet softer than usual, as if he sensed the shift in the world around them. A fragile peace settling where violence had once prowled. From inside the cabin, Mara Lewis emerged, wrapped in Ethan's spare jacket. It hung loosely on her slim frame, the dark green fabric swallowing her shoulders, but her steps were steadier now. Her face, though still marked with faint bruising along her cheekbone, carried a warmth he hadn't seen in her before. She tucked a strand of her brown hair behind her ear, the gesture almost shy. "The rescue team called," she said. "The animals made it to the transport hub. The cubs are stabilizing." Relief rippled across Ethan's chest. "Good." Mara's lips curved into a tired smile. "They're being sent to the northern sanctuary once they're strong enough. A protected zone, no hunting, no interference. The cubs will be safe there." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the past days begin to ease. The cabin door swung wider when the wind caught it, revealing the tidy interior. Fresh logs stacked by the stove, melted snow drying near the hearth, blankets folded with Mara's neat precision. She had insisted on helping repair the cabin the past 2 days, clearing snow from the roof, fixing loose shingles, even tightening hinges on a stubborn window. There was a gentleness in her labor, but also something resolute, like restoration wasn't just for the wood, but for the people living inside it. Rock trotted toward the steps, stretching before lying down with a huff of contentment. Mara followed his gaze and smiled. "He's finally resting." "He earned it," Ethan said. "We all did." A crunch of tires against packed snow drew their attention. 2 black SUVs rolled to a stop near the tree line. Federal agents stepped out, men and women in thick winter coats, their movements brisk and procedural. One of them, Agent Howard Bray, introduced himself with a curt nod. He was in his 50s, tall and thick around the middle, with a salt-pepper beard trimmed close to his jaw. His gray eyes were sharp and tired, belonging to someone who had spent too many years unraveling other people's crimes. "Miss Lewis," greeted, shaking Mara's hand. "We've collected Derek Hart and the remaining suspects. Trafficking, attempted murder, conspiracy. He'll be buried under charges." Mara stiffened at the name, but managed a steady breath. "Good. We'll need your statements. Howard added. "Both of you." Ethan crossed his arms. It was always strange being back on official paperwork, involvement, scrutiny, but he nodded. "I'll tell you what happened." Howard gave him an assessing look. The kind men who lived by reports often gave veterans who lived by instincts. Then he clapped Ethan once on the shoulder. Things could have ended much worse. As the agents bustled through the camp remains, collecting evidence and securing the transport crates left behind, Ethan stepped aside, letting their efficiency flood the space. Mara lingered near him, eyes following the bustle without really seeing it. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "Ethan, the world needs people like you and Rock, people who don't look away." Ethan met her gaze. The storm had carved lines of determination into her face, lines that made her stronger, not harder. She swallowed once before continuing. "If you and Rock hadn't been there that night, I wouldn't be standing here." Ethan looked down at Rock, who thumped his tail once as if accepting the compliment. Then Ethan's voice unfurled from deep within his chest, steady as the sigh of the forest. "We all have reasons to keep going, Mara. Some call it duty." He paused, eyes drifting across the snowy clearing where sunlight pierced the branches in long, golden beams. "I call it a second chance." Mara exhaled, and for the first time there was softness in her eyes unburdened by fear or anger. They spoke for a while longer, about trails, about the future court case, about where she might go next. But eventually, the federal team finished. Engines started, doors shut, and Mara, with a final lingering look, stepped into the SUV waiting for her. Ethan lifted a hand in silent farewell. She returned the gesture with a small, grateful smile before the vehicle rolled away, tires crunching into the distance. When silence reclaimed the clearing, Ethan stood alone with Rock. Snowflakes drifted lazily now, harmless shapes that spun gently before settling on the railing. Rock settled beside him, nudging Ethan's knee with his cold nose. Ethan rested a hand between the shepherd's ears. "Looks like it's just us again," he murmured. The dog wagged his tail, slow and calm. Ethan raised his gaze toward the forest. Sunlight pierced through the pines, casting a soft glow that melted the sharp edges of winter. And for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel the season pressing down on him. Instead, winter felt lighter, no longer something to survive, but something that could pass. A chapter closing, a breath easing, a second chance quietly beginning. In the quiet that followed the storm, one truth remained clear. Sometimes the miracles we wait for do not arrive in shining light or thunderous signs. Sometimes they come in the form of a stranger who refuses to walk away, a loyal dog who senses danger before we do, or the strength to rise after being broken. Many would say it was luck that brought Mara to safety, or instinct that guided Rock through the snow, or training that pushed Ethan to fight when the night seemed determined to take everything. But those who have lived long enough, those who have suffered, healed, and stumbled forward through the winters of their own lives, know that some moments carry the unmistakable touch of something larger than us. Call it grace. Call it God's quiet hand. Call it the small miracles that slip into our days disguised as ordinary choices, ordinary courage, ordinary people. And perhaps that is the lesson we are meant to carry back into our own lives. That in the middle of our struggles, when the world grows cold or heavy, God may work through the hearts around us, through the kindness we give or receive, through second chances that appear when we least deserve them. If this story reached you, moved you, or reminded you of the goodness still threading through the world, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment, tell your thoughts, and subscribe so we can continue bringing more stories of light, compassion, and resilience to those who search for them. May God bless you and watch over you and your loved ones, today and every quiet morning that follows.